Let's start with that breaking story, the developing story we've seen over the last hour or so, because Estonia's government says 3 Russian military jets entered NATO airspace without permission on Friday morning and stayed there for nearly 12 minutes.
September 2025. Mikoyan Gurevich, 30 fighters and 1 fully armed Russian crossed the border of Estonia. They don't respond to communications. They don't deviate from the route for 12 minutes. They violate a NATO member's airspace. Beginning of October.
Dropped Russian drones that have invaded the country's airspace. And NATO allies have taken part in this reaction against the Russian military maneuver.
Russian drones invade Polish territory. Coming from Belarus in mid-October, mysterious balloons cross the Belarusian border for 3 consecutive nights, forcing the closure of the 2 largest airports in Lithuania. 170 cancelled flights, 30,000 passengers arrested. 3 countries, 3 provocations, 3 members of NATO. October 27, 2025. Lithuania is fed up with this, decides to make a decision that changes everything. They're closing the border again. They've turned Putin's most powerful weapon into his greatest weakness. We're talking about Kaliningrad, a piece of Russian territory trapped between Poland and Lithuania on the coast of the Baltic Sea. 450,000 people live there. Dozens of thousands of soldiers are stationed in this military base. For years, Russia has used this as a forward base. Right in the middle of Europe, this strategic advantage can become a serious problem. To see why this is so complicated, we need to look at the map. Kaliningrad, no connection by land with the rest of Russia. After the Second World War, this territory was separated. On one side, Poland, on the other, Lithuania, both members of NATO. And in the middle of this region, 500,000 people and one of Russia's most important military bases. I know that at this time, many are thinking, okay, but how can Russia get supplies there? And look, there are 3 ways. By land, passing through Lithuania and Belarus. By sea, crossing the Baltic. And by air. It seems simple, right? But it's not. Look, the land route has always been the most practical and reliable. Trucks, trains, military convoys, everything passed through Lithuania, entered Belarus, and continued to continental Russia. This corridor was the main way to supply Kaliningrad, but on October 27, using those balloons as a justification, Lithuania closed this route. The 2 main border posts, Medininkai and Salsininkai, were blocked. But wait, this is not the first time this has happened. In 2022, Lithuania had already tried to restrict transit to Kaliningrad. That time, Russia reacted with force, making serious threats. Germany was worried about the possibility of a military escalation.
The example shows you can't trust verbal or written statements from the West. Russia will respond to these hostile actions. Departments are coordinating and will take appropriate measures soon. Their consequences will seriously harm Lithuania's population.
European Commission ended up retreating and forced Lithuania to open the borders again. At that moment, Russia managed to reverse the situation. But then, is it different? This? Things completely changed the game. The justification. In 2022, Lithuania was trying to apply sanctions from the European Union. This meant that Brussels could change its mind and reinterpret the rules. 2025. Lithuania used a different argument: airport security. In other words, it wanted to protect its airspace. This is a sovereign decision by the country. The European Commission lacks authority to cancel this. Second, Russia's military status has changed. In 2022, the Russian armed forces still had an image of strength. By the end of 2025, after almost 4 years of war in Ukraine, the Russian army is worn out. The most important thing is the third change. Finland and Sweden joined NATO. Before, they were neutral countries. They are part of the Western Alliance. This turned the Baltic into an area controlled by NATO. And do you want to know what that all means in practice? Well, Kaliningrad is already surrounded by land, we already know that. But what about the sea? Sweden placed anti-ship missiles on Gotland. These missiles, called RBS-15, can hit targets hundreds of kilometers away. Poland did the same on its coast. Now, imagine a Russian ship leaving from St. Petersburg to take supplies to Kaliningrad. First, it needs to pass through the Gulf of Finland. This gulf is like a narrow canal. Missiles on one side, Estonia placed them on the other side. Even before reaching the open sea, this Russian ship is already under observation and within reach of the missiles of two NATO countries. If you can get through the Gulf, you still have to cross the Baltic Sea. In the middle of the way is Gotland, that Swedish island. The missiles installed there cover a huge area around the island. Any ship that tries to cross is completely exposed. The chances of a Russian ship crossing without problems are very low. The Baltic, which used to operate freely, is limited, practically stuck in its own ports. So there's the option of the air. In theory, Russia could use large military transport. Ilyushin 76, for example, can carry several tons of cargo. But this air bridge has two serious problems. First, it costs a lot of money. Second, it's risky. NATO keeps surveillance planes in the air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, monitoring the entire region. Each Russian aircraft that tries to use this air corridor is detected immediately. F-35 Gripen fighters from Sweden, Eurofighter from Germany. Everyone is ready. And when these fighters escort a Russian transport plane, it's not something friendly. They fly very close, just a few meters away. The message is direct. Any detour, any strange movement, and the situation can escalate quickly. Each of these flights carries a high risk. It can turn into a serious international incident. Using an air bridge constantly is not a viable solution. You can see Kaliningrad is surrounded by land, by sea, and by air. It is a declared blockade. It's something more subtle, but just as effective. It is a demonstration of territorial control. Lithuania has shown that it can tighten this fence at any time, even against Russia. She has few options to respond. And do you want to know why? Because any military action against Lithuania would be an attack on a NATO member. That triggers Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. That article basically says that an attack on one member country is considered an attack on all member countries. That means Russia would automatically be in conflict with all of NATO. The United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, all at the same time. The former commander of the United States Army in Europe, General Ben Hodges, commented on this. He said that in a direct conflict between NATO and Russia, Kaliningrad would be taken in the first hours of combat. And you know what's even more impressive? The consequences are already starting to show. When Lithuania closed the border in October, road freight transport came to a complete halt. Thousands of trucks were stuck on both sides of the border. Lithuania. Bus companies from Belarus canceled all trips to Vilnius and Riga. Kaliningrad's economy had already been suffering since 2022 because of international sanctions. Between 2022 and 2023, the region's economy shrank by 2.2%. Meanwhile, the rest of Russia experienced economic growth. The price of construction materials skyrocketed in the region. Some products became 70% more expensive, while others increased by 266%. But that was just the beginning. The Avtotor factory, one of the main companies in the region, had already stopped production due to a lack of parts and components. With the permanent closure of the border, there's no way to resume operations. For the 450,000 civilians living in Kaliningrad, this means a lack of basic products in the market, higher prices, and job losses. The risk of social unrest and protests isn't such a distant possibility. It's something that could happen very soon. And there's another side to this story. Belarus is also being affected. About 90% of all rail freight between China and Europe passes through Belarusian territory. This is part of a major Chinese project called the Belt and Road Initiative. It's basically a network of trade routes that China is building to connect Asia with Europe. This route generates 25 billion euros per year in transportation revenue for Belarus. When Poland temporarily closed its border in September during Russian and Belarusian military exercises called Zapad, more than 130 freight trains were stopped. With Lithuania's indefinite closure in October, this important trade route was cut off. Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, who helped create this crisis with his provocations, now sees billions of dollars disappearing. Belarus relies heavily on this transit revenue and also depends on economic support from Russia. Without economic diversification, the country becomes increasingly vulnerable. And do you want to know who else is losing out because of all this? China herself. That's because China maintains a strategic partnership with Russia, but this partnership is costing her a lot. China's reliable access to the European market, its largest market, is at risk. Just so you have an idea, the Belt and Road Initiative represents trillions of dollars in Chinese investments. And now, this route is completely dependent on the security decisions of the countries it passes through. In September, when the Polish foreign minister met with the Chinese representative, the message was direct. Security issues are becoming more important than commercial issues. China is now in a difficult position. It still maintains its alliance with Russia, but its economic interests are being harmed by Russia's actions in the region. And this may lead the Chinese to pressure Russia to reduce tensions. Something new in this war. Stop and think. No one imagined this could happen when the war started. Back in 2022, Russia was in a complicated position. It can't react militarily because that would mean a direct war with NATO. A war that, according to military calculations, Russia wouldn't be able to win. It can't make empty threats anymore because 2022 showed that those threats don't work when the other side doesn't back down. And because of that, Kaliningrad ended up becoming a strategic problem that consumes resources, many of them resources that could be used elsewhere, like in Ukraine. Putin now needs to supply this isolated territory mainly by sea and air. Both routes are under constant monitoring by NATO, and there's still the risk of social problems within the region itself. Even so, it's undeniable that this is a very important strategic turnaround. As you can see, this Russian attempt to use Kaliningrad as an advanced military base in Europe ended up creating a major vulnerability. The same actions that aimed to pressure the Baltic countries ended up leading NATO to become even stronger in the region. Finland and Sweden have joined the alliance. The borders are better protected with modern weapons, and more troops are stationed near Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg. The base that was supposed to project power is now surrounded. What was supposed to be an advantage for Putin has turned into a logistical nightmare. Now, I want to know your opinion. Which country do you think is losing the most with this situation? Russia, Belarus, or China? Post your answer in the comments. And if this video helped you better understand this geopolitical twist, share it with someone who is also interested in this topic. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next content. See you next time.